They fired me on a Thursday afternoon while the rain was coming down hard. No warning, no handshake, not even the decency of looking me in the eye. Just a call from HR, a short meeting in a room without chairs, and a brown envelope pushed across the table like I was a card someone had already played and forgotten. I didn't ask why. I didn't cry. I didn't react. I simply stood up, nodded, and walked back to my desk, where three monitors were still showing the contract verification system for the merger between Westbridge and Ellison Technologies, a $300 million deal. My name is Sienna Roth. 13 years at Westbridge, and I never showed up for team lunches, never appeared in company event photos, never joined a single weekend hackathon. I was invisible to most of them, but I was the only one with federal-level security clearance, the only one authorized to configure the integration layers between the two core systems, and the only person with the final signing authority for the merger validation. They didn't know, or they forgot, that I was the last link in the chain, and now they had removed it, convinced nothing would fall apart. I closed the tabs, disconnected my personal access from the system, pulled out the secondary drive I always carried with me, and started packing my things. Small items. A coffee mug printed with I debug, therefore I am, a notebook filled with handwritten diagrams of complex API circuits, and a half-full jar of peppermint mints that kept me awake during those 2 in the morning integration sessions. When I stepped out of the building, no one stopped me. A few eyes avoided me. Someone widened theirs, but said nothing. I didn't blame them. To them, I was just Sienna from the 3rd floor, the woman nobody ever really understood. But the system I built was still running, and it was only running because I was still there. I sat inside my car with my hands shaking. Rain kept hitting the windshield. I unlocked my phone and logged into the private repository ID I maintained since my 5th year at Westbridge. Inside it was one special file, Vault Sigma 7. It held the identity link certification key between Westbridge and Ellison. I deleted one line, just one, a personal key tied to my federal authentication profile. Not a password, not a document, just a single unique identifier. But removing that line meant the federal system could no longer match a legal identity for anyone else during the final verification step. Without me, the system could not validate the merger. No validation meant the signature workflow froze, and if it stayed frozen for more than 72 hours, the merger would automatically be suspended under SEC regulations. They didn't know that. No one in that conference room this morning knew that, because they didn't need to. For 13 years, all they ever needed from me was to make it run. And I did, without complaints, without needing the spotlight. As long as the system stayed clean and the coffee didn't go cold. Now the coffee was cold. I never saw this as revenge. Truly. I had prepared for this day 2 years ago when a colleague was laid off without a single explanation. That was when I began building self-protection layers, rewriting integration clauses, quietly inserting a new condition. Clause 17C. Terminating the primary identity link engineer without appointing a legally verified replacement within 48 hours invalidates the entire merger process. I never told anyone about that clause, not because I wanted to hide it, but because no one ever asked. In every meeting, only Greg, Ellison's legal representative, understood how critical it was. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight into my office, opened the security cabinet, and pulled out a printed copy of the integration contract with signatures from both sides, except for the final section. The line for me. That part was still blank. They thought I was replaceable, an outdated engineer who wasn't fast enough for their new culture, a middle-aged woman who no longer fits the startup aesthetic. They were wrong. They didn't know I never built the system to serve them. I built it to protect itself from their carelessness and their arrogance, so that when the worst finally happened, when they tossed me aside like a spare part, the system would shield itself. And now it was doing exactly that. If you're still listening, maybe you know someone like me. Someone who carried the whole system in silence and still got pushed out without a thank you. If you've ever witnessed something that unfair, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if you love quiet, calculated revenge stories that cut deeper than anyone expects, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next part, because you won't want to miss what comes next. I woke up at 6 in the morning the next day, earlier than usual. Not because I was anxious or worried, but because my body still wasn't used to the silence. No Slack notifications, no stand up meetings, no emails saying, Sienna, urgent, only you can fix this. The kitchen was quiet. I stood there watching the coffee drip into the cup as if I were watching the countdown to a controlled explosion. My mind wasn't on the hurt, it was in the process. No one in that conference room yesterday realized I held the final verification key for the integration system. And Greg, Ellison's attorney, was probably assuming everything was moving along, that I'd submit the digital signature on schedule. He had no idea I had been fired, and that was the problem. I opened my personal laptop and logged into the federal vault system. My name was still listed as an active identity link. No one had notified the federal side about the termination of my contract. It might look like a simple administrative oversight, but in a transaction like this, it was a fatal flaw. If I were no longer a certified legal representative and no one replaced me within 48 hours, the entire merger would grind to a halt. I opened my email and drafted a short message. No emotion, no elaboration. Sent to Greg. Hello, Greg. I want to confirm that Ellison is still waiting for the final identity verification from my credentials. If there are any changes, please confirm the personnel substitution process. Regards, Sienna Roth. Greg replied within minutes. In typical legal fashion, polite, clipped, slightly smug. Hello, Sienna. Yes. Ellison is awaiting your final verification. Expected completion within the next 48 hours. No changes have been communicated from Westbridge. Thank you for your cooperation. I smiled. They still didn't know. I pulled an old folder from my steel cabinet, a hard copy of the cooperation memorandum between the two companies. On the last page, under legal validity of merger execution, Clause 17C was underlined in red a year ago. Terminating the federal identity-linked engineer without appointing a legally verified replacement will result in suspension of the merger process under federal protocol. I added that clause after an internal meeting between the IT teams, when Tate, the new executive director, stood in front of the company and announced we need to clean up outdated legacy, streamline staff, restructure everything. I understood then. He wasn't saying my name, but he was talking about people like me, the quiet pieces they believed were unnecessary. The problem was I wasn't necessary. I was the center they couldn't see. And when the center disappears, everything tilts. I sat down and opened the integration management software. Every data package I had built, from API maps and security certificates to validation logs, was there. No one knew how to reach them because I was the one who configured the access. They thought they could hand this off like a PowerPoint file, but this was a triple-layered integration system, cross-encrypted, tied to my personal identity and multiple federal verification layers. Transferring it without me was impossible. I knew Greg would realize it soon, maybe today, maybe Monday morning, when the system throws its first authentication error. But before that happened, I needed a legal shield. I called my attorney, Anna, the one who handled my father's insurance case 5 years ago. I didn't need much, just a letter confirming I was no longer an employee of Westbridge and that any obligations tied to the merger were no longer my legal responsibility. Anna didn't ask why. She understood the moment she heard my voice. While waiting for the letter, I opened my secondary laptop. There, I kept a full backup of the integration process from 3 months ago. Everything. Server configurations, test logs, compliance certificates. I opened the file. Protocol backbone v17.json. The heart of the system. I scrolled to the fallback validation line and deleted it, the line that allowed a third party to intervene if my authentication was unavailable. Their only escape route was if they wanted to replace me quickly. Now it was gone. Without me, the system wouldn't run. Without the system, the signatures wouldn't go through. Without signatures, the merger would die on the table. I looked out the window. The rain had stopped. Sunlight slipped through the branches outside, scattering bright streaks across my desk. What I felt wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It felt like justice. I had done the right thing. I had protected the system. I had kept it out of the hands of people who believed this kind of work could run on a single click and a quick replacement. Tomorrow they would learn otherwise. Monday began with a message from Anna. Sent the confirmation letter by email and by mail. The digital copy with authentication is attached. If they respond, forward it to me. I downloaded the file and saved it in 3 separate locations, one of them inside a private, encrypted cloud vault, completely isolated from anything tied to Westbridge. When that was done, I made coffee. Not the bitter sludge from the office machine. Mine was a light roast I ordered from a small shop in Oregon, run by a former IT engineer who quit his job to follow a simple belief: do everything with your own hands. I always saw a piece of myself in him. At 9:10 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring. 10 minutes later, another call. The internal desk line from Westbridge. I let it go to voicemail. Just as I expected, Greg had discovered the truth. I opened the voicemail. His voice played through, no longer as confident as before. Sienna, we just received a notice that you are no longer employed by Westbridge. I need clear confirmation from you. What does this mean for the integration workflow? Can you call me back as soon as possible? I didn't call him back. I didn't need to. My attorney would handle it. At 10:17, an email was sent from Ellison's main inbox to Westbridge, requesting verification of identity-linked personnel for the merger. Sienna Roth is no longer under legal authority from Westbridge. Please clarify the replacement procedure and identity reassignment within 24 hours. Transaction is paused pending response. I used to imagine this day, not because I wanted to see them fall, but because I wanted them to finally understand the value of what they always treated as automatic. I pictured Tate losing his temper in the conference room on the 14th floor, blaming HR or compliance, or maybe even me, the one who abandoned the company at its most critical moment. But none of them could deny one truth. I didn't walk away. They pushed me out. And in the system I built, that action had consequences. That afternoon, I got another call. This time from Lisa's personal number, the only coworker who ever spoke more than 3 sentences to me on a normal day. I answered. Sienna, are you all right? Her voice was shaky. I'm fine. How are things over there? You have no idea what's happening. Compliance has been pulled into an emergency meeting. They brought out the old integration protocol, checking every step. Someone mentioned Clause 17C, and then a legal officer jumped up and immediately made calls. I said nothing. I just listened. Lisa continued. Tate is trying to fix it somehow, but everyone knows he doesn't understand the workflow. They are panicking. I said only this. The issue isn't understanding. The issue is that the system cannot be restored without a valid identity link, and that identity is no longer active. Lisa paused for a moment, then exhaled softly. I always knew you were doing more than what people saw. I just didn't realize how critical it was. I didn't need her validation. But hearing it still eased something inside me. That evening, Anna forwarded another message to me. Ellison had responded again. We cannot proceed with the merger unless the identity-linked engineer is replaced and re-verified in the federal system. All procedures are temporarily suspended. Westbridge must provide a full explanation within 48 hours. I knew they couldn't explain anything. No one else had ever gone through the federal clearance process the way I had. 6 months of paperwork, 2 rounds of psychological evaluations, and 12 independent security exams. No one at the company had the patience or the endurance for that, and more importantly, I had never shared the full structure of the system with anyone. They thought it was all documented. It wasn't. The documents were on the surface. The real structure lived in my head, in the logic I built, in the way the system reacted to the unexpected. I looked at my screen. A system map appeared with all pending links highlighted. A single red line flashed across it. Pending third-party identity clearance. Timeout in 39:48:17. I closed the laptop. Tate had less than 2 days to retrieve something he had thrown away with his own hands. The problem was, it never had a backup. At 3 in the morning, I woke up. Not from a nightmare, just habit. 13 years in a system that could break anywhere, anytime, had trained me to wake up before something failed. And now that I was no longer inside that system, my body still reacted. I sat up, opened my old laptop from the early internal testing days, and logged into the secondary vault. Every system I ever built had one thing in common. No one understood them the way I did, not because I hid anything, but because they never wanted to learn. When I was still there, they thought I made things too complicated. They never saw that I was the one keeping everything simpler than it had any right to be. The interactive map of the Ellison-Westbridge integration system lit up on the screen. A yellow ring blinked around the primary authentication node. Less than 36 hours left on the countdown. I zoomed in on the core, the part only I fully understood: cross-agency authentication chains, encrypted Treasury data links, the tri-layer audit registry. We once spent 7 hours in a meeting trying to help the legal team understand that a single misplaced character would invalidate the entire verification chain. I remembered the exhausted look on Tate's face as I presented. He asked, "Can't we make this simpler?" No, we couldn't. Complexity was part of the security. I nodded back then and said, "I will handle this," and he let me. At 8 in the morning, a message from Lisa arrived. Just one line: "You won't believe this. Tate is bringing someone from outside to replace your role." I smirked. Exactly as expected. I called Anna. After a few rings, she answered, her voice groggy. "Let me guess. You heard too." "Yeah," I said. "They can try, but my identity link isn't just a name and a number. It's the result of an entire federal clearance process. They can't bypass it." Anna let out a quiet laugh. "You give them too much credit. They're trying to send verification signals from a temporary identity. Ellison already sent me an alert. The system blocked everything. Permanently." I asked. "No. They get one more attempt. After that, the primary identity will freeze." "Let them try," I said. By that afternoon, word reached me through Kyle, my former assistant. Westbridge had hired a consulting team from Boston to untangle the merger crisis. Leading the group was a compliance expert who once handled the South Bank fallout 4 years ago. I knew him. His name was Charles Kinney. Talented but arrogant, preferred shortcuts over following the process. And just as I predicted, they didn't study the system properly. Charles thought he could rebuild the verification chain from a simulation model. They ran a proxy identity sequence, pushed it to the cross-finance verification servers, and for 12 minutes, it looked like it might work. Until the system returned one final message. Verification failed. Data does not match the primary certification. System status: temporary lock. Remaining attempts: 1. I could almost picture Tate throwing a pen across the room and yelling at someone. Charles would definitely ask for access to the original linkage structure, but the real documentation had never left the encrypted archive, and the encryption key lived with me, a single-use key, offline, non-duplicable. It only activated with my approval. I did not approve. The next day, Kyle texted me. "Kinney just stepped out of the meeting room. He looks pale. No one is talking." "They're trying to reach you. They're scared now," I replied. "How much time is left on the clock?" Kyle sent a screenshot. 20 hours remaining. I tapped my keyboard lightly as the lockout command flickered in my memory like an old scar. Every character of it is still familiar. Not because I had a perfect memory, but because I wrote it as a final shield. When betrayal came, no one could take that protection from me. That evening, an email arrived. Not from the company, from their attorney. A formal request: return. Resume your role within 24 hours. With a compensations package triple your previous salary, plus a joint venture integration oversight position granting full technical authority after the merger. I looked at the message, then deleted it. The problem wasn't the money, it wasn't the title. The problem was that they never trusted me while I was there, and now, with the entire system on fire, they didn't want me. They wanted someone to hold the hose. But I was no longer an employee. I was an independent legal entity with the right to negotiate and the right to refuse. A few minutes later, Anna sent the response on my behalf. If Westbridge intends to continue using infrastructure designed and maintained by Sienna Roth, negotiations will proceed under an external partnership agreement. Current operating body: SR Systems, LLC. All activities require a new confidentiality contract and service terms defined by the provider. No more office, no more nameplate, No more the woman from the old system. Now I was a clause. On the third day after they tried to renegotiate and I refused, I woke up early. It wasn't really waking up. I simply never fell asleep. It wasn't a worry. It was the sense that I was standing at the edge of something bigger than revenge, like I had shifted the direction of a current that had been flowing the same way for years. On the desk was a printed copy of Westbridge's latest response. Not an apology, but soft enough to show they were trying to salvage whatever dignity they had left. What mattered wasn't the wording, it was the attachment. A temporary partnership proposal, clearly drafted in a rush by their legal team. They were buying time. I didn't respond. I let an automated message from SR Systems answer for me. We have received your request. Estimated response time, 5 business days. I knew they didn't have 5 days. At 10 in the morning, my phone rang. A number from New York. I didn't answer. 2 minutes later, an email from Anna came in. They are trying to go around you, I typed quickly. Who? Anna called immediately. Listen, they're not trying to replace you anymore. They're doing something worse. They're trying to rebuild the entire process from scratch. Charles Kinney has summoned a team from Ashridge. They want to construct a parallel integration system to force Ellison into validating it, bypassing you completely. I paused, then asked, They think they can force a revalidation. Exactly, Anna said, by sending an emergency request from the federal level. They contacted someone inside the Federal Technical Bureau. I don't know what they promised, but it was enough to make that person consider it. I closed the laptop. This move was dangerous, not because it would work, but because it was close to working. If they managed to build a clone accurate enough to mimic 95% of the original authentication chain, the interagency system might grant temporary approval for a few hours before the auditors caught the mismatch. I couldn't let that happen. I walked into my office and unlocked the data vault. Inside were original protocol backups from 5 years ago. I had encrypted them with more than standard security algorithms. They were tied to contextual verification logic, the type that couldn't be replicated with technical tricks. I opened the file node, liaison, alpha.json, and edited 3 lines. For each change, I logged the time and the intention. The final line, added contextual verification barrier to prevent intervention by unauthorized third parties. Signed, SR. Then I logged into a private channel between SR Systems and the Treasury Department, a channel created during my interagency testing period, reserved only for severe anomaly alerts. I submitted a formal warning titled, Unauthorized Reconstruction Attempt by a Former Linked Entity, Transaction Code WBE031. I knew this report would force a temporary halt on all authentication activity until a full investigation was completed. A small delay, but enough to stop their little workaround. That afternoon, Ellison released a notice to all stakeholders. Due to abnormal activity detected in parallel verification requests, interagency authentication systems will be temporarily suspended for 72 hours for investigation. I let out a breath. They had just lost their trump card. Inside Westbridge, the cracks began to show. Tate, who once manipulated everything with effortless confidence, had become the easiest target. Lisa texted me. They're turning on each other. After the message from Ellison, Tate yelled at Kinney in the meeting. Kinney threatened to resign. Kyle sent another update. No one on the 9th floor is talking. Feels like a funeral. I wasn't pleased. I didn't need them to collapse. I needed them to understand. Understand that not every system can replace a human with a diagram. Understand that not everything can be fixed with money, pressure, or political shortcuts. A few hours later, Anna called again, her voice low. I just got a strange call. No name, but I'm certain it was from Macrovia. I raised an eyebrow. The potential buyer. Yes, she said. They asked about the situation. Very polite, very indirect. But they're worried. If this merger falls apart because of Westbridge's misconduct, they will pull out. I sat still, feeling a small but unmistakable pulse in my chest. Not fear. Responsibility. This wasn't just about me anymore. The entire system was on the edge of collapse, simply because a few people believed that technical discipline and years of dedication could be replaced by shortcuts. No, not this time. The next morning, I drove to a small cafe on the south side of the city, the same place where I first met the Ellison team during a federal tech consultation. It was also the only place I knew with stable Wi Fi, real wooden tables, and no one who recognized me. I sat in the corner with a black espresso, opened my laptop, and pulled up the system logs from the night before. Every update had gone through. The timestamps matched the interagency ledger. No unauthorized access, at least not yet. I knew Westbridge wouldn't sit still. Sure enough, at 9 in the morning, an email from an unfamiliar address appeared in the SR Systems inbox. No subject line, no signature. Only one short sentence. We both know this doesn't need to go any further. I didn't respond. 2 minutes later, a text came in. From Kyle. Someone from the board reached out to me. They want to know what your conditions are to come back. I leaned back in my chair and watched the sunlight streak across the window. It had begun. The first round of the shadow negotiation. Not about reputation, not about money, about leverage. And right now, I hold all of it. I didn't answer immediately. Every move needed to be calculated the way every line of code had been. I opened an old file from 3 years ago. Bridgecore, Foundation Charter. It was the document I wrote to convince Ellison and the audit division that the interagency integration system could set a new security standard. At the end, I had left a note. If this system functions as designed, no one, not even me, can take control of it unilaterally. But if someone is smart enough to create it, they might also be the only one who knows how to stop it when necessary. Back then, I wrote it with idealism. Now, I read it with a hint of bitterness. But it also meant I understood exactly where I stood in this game. I wasn't just a critical link, I was the foundation, and everyone was beginning to realize it. That afternoon, I received a call from someone I did not expect, the CEO of Macrovia, Elaine Myers. Her voice was low, firm, and calm. Good morning, Amanda. I know you're no longer with Core West, and I respect that. But I need to ask, is the current situation putting this entire deal at risk? I didn't dodge. Yes. And it may even compromise Macrovia's reputation if anyone forces the system to run through loopholes. She fell silent for a moment, then said, I appreciate the honesty. Would you be willing to consult independently for us to reassess the entire integration structure? It was the first time the buyer had reached out to me directly. I looked up from my laptop. This was the move that changed the board. Only if my role is formally recognized as an independent auditor, free from Westbridge or any other influence. She didn't take more than 3 seconds. We will finalize the contract within 24 hours. And Amanda, this time, you get to choose who writes the terms. That night, I sent Anna a message. Westbridge isn't the center anymore. Macrovia just made a different move, and they chose the right one. Anna replied almost immediately. So, you're coming back in, aren't you? I didn't answer directly. I simply sent a screenshot of the contract draft with the Macrovia logo and the line, Consultant of Record. Below it was the scope of work section with one sentence. To assess, validate, and if necessary, dismantle any system that compromises long-term compliance integrity. I had just been given the authority to evaluate, and if needed, dismantle the entire old architecture. A full-scale operation. And I was holding the scalpel. At the same time, internal leaks pushed Westbridge into another spiral. An internal email surfaced showing Tate complaining. The fact that Amanda Delaney has been invited by Macrovia could destroy our entire negotiation stance. Along with a note from another director. Has anyone checked who actually signed her termination paperwork? What were we thinking? Panic was spreading from the executive floors down to the engineering teams. I didn't have to strike back. All I had to do was exist long enough for them to implode under the weight of the very system they mistreated. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the one fixing the errors. I was the one pointing them out. I know people like Tate. They don't believe in consequences until those consequences walk straight into the boardroom. They think every mistake can be covered with an emergency meeting, a colorful slide deck, and a few emails apologizing for the inconvenience. Not this time. Early the next morning, I received a notice from Macrovia. They were officially requesting that I open an independent security audit on Westbridge's core system as a certified inspector. They already had access to the upper tiers on their side, but the rest, the most critical linkage layer, was still locked on Westbridge's end, and it carried my name. I didn't need to step inside the headquarters. From the small office in my rented apartment, I navigated the entire audit structure. The integration system unfolded in front of me like a battle map, where the weak points lived, where the unfinished code hid, and where they had copied sections from the test build and called it a final product. But the most important discovery was this: Westbridge had quietly altered one of the core linkage conditions, removing the original authentication rule I built and replacing it with a bypass logic created by Tate's team. In other words, they had tried to cheat the system. They had broken a federal security clause, and they thought I would never see it. I filed a report to Macrovia immediately. No drama, no accusations, only facts. The current system contains modifications that deviate from the original certified model. These changes violate the merger agreement and pose significant legal and security risks. Less than an hour later, I received a response from Elaine Myers. Your report will be escalated to senior legal oversight. From this point forward, you represent Macrovia in all technical matters related to verification. You may request any documentation you require. Attached was a scanned handwritten note. Sometimes the only way to protect a bridge is to bring down the people trying to rebuild it with straw. I didn't need any further approval. That afternoon, an emergency internal meeting erupted inside Westbridge. In that meeting, Tate stood before the board and tried to defend himself. The system reconstruction was necessary to meet deadlines. Every adjustment was under our supervision. No one agreed. Instead, the CFO, Bernard, slammed a thick stack of papers on the table. This is the report from Macrovia. Amanda uncovered everything you did, and now they are demanding a legal audit. The entire merger could collapse if they prove we altered the system on purpose. Tate started sweating. His eyes darted around, searching for a lifeline. We can fix it. I will handle it myself. No, Bernard cut him off. From now on, only one person is authorized to handle anything, and she no longer works here. I heard the entire exchange through Anna, who had access to the technical oversight group and forwarded me the internal recording. You are officially the most feared name in Westbridge, she texted. Someone even put your picture on the whiteboard with the line, "Do not mention her," in front of Tate. I smiled, slow and deep. Not because it pleased me, because everything I had warned them about, every risk, every structural flaw they insisted they could override with leadership willpower, was becoming undeniable. This time, I didn't have to shout. The system they twisted was sounding the alarm on its own. 2 days later, Macrovia held a three-party meeting with their legal representatives, me, and an advisor from the Interagency Coordination Committee. There was only one topic: Westbridge's non-compliance and the formal path forward. It was the first time I appeared not as an engineer, not as a former employee, but as the central figure deciding whether the merger would live or die. During the meeting, the committee advisor, Scott, looked directly at me. You designed the core. You have the authority to determine whether it remains legally valid, and if necessary, to recommend termination of the entire process. I nodded. Not prideful, not rushed. I won't destroy a system just because I am no longer part of it. But if it has been altered in ways that make it dangerous, then it is no longer the system I built. I walked them through every violation, every modified sequence, every security layer they had carved out. No one objected. By the end of the session, Macrovia issued a formal notice to Westbridge. The entire merger process was frozen indefinitely. All data would undergo an independent audit, and only after my signature could anything move forward again. I closed my laptop and took a long breath. The room was quiet. Soft light, steady wind through the window. Everything was calm. A war won without a single shot. I was simply the last person left who still held the truth. I used to think the fatal blow in a $300 million merger would come from a financial scandal, a legal ambush, or at the very least a data leak dramatic enough to make the press swarm. But in the end, the thing that killed it was much simpler. It was a name erased from the system, and that name was mine. On Friday at 7:03 in the morning, Macrovia released a short statement across every financial newswire. Temporary suspension of the Westbridge merger due to violations in data security verification. and the abrupt termination of the key technical coordinator. One sentence, and it sliced straight through Westbridge's stock price like a blade. The market value plummeted within the first trading hour, 13%, then 17%, and it kept falling as analysts dissected the situation across investment forums. The financial world called it the silent collapse. No scandal, no affair, no hacking incident. Just a name that vanished the moment everyone sat down to sign. A name they refused to say publicly, but were whispering to each other on Slack, Discord, and internal email threads. Amanda Delaney. "What did she do?" one of the finance directors shouted during an emergency meeting with the legal team at 9 in the morning. "She didn't do anything, Bernard," the CTO replied in a low voice. "That is the problem. She stepped away at the exact moment everything depended on her. That isn't sabotage. That is a consequence." Tate, still clinging to the last scrap of authority he had left, tried to sound calm, though panic was written all over his eyes. "I don't understand. Why can't anyone replace her? This isn't rocket science." Bernard pointed at the integration diagram, at the final line highlighted in red with the note "non-transferable clearance," verified by a third-party legal. "You signed this clause, Tate," he said, exhausted. "She hid it," Tate snapped. "She set me up. If you don't read what you signed, don't blame anyone else," Bernard answered coldly. Silence swallowed the room. Somewhere in the building, contract pipelines were being frozen. The legal department received more than 40 emails demanding clarification on my termination. HR was probably hiding under their desks. And me. I was at home, in pajamas, sipping coffee and reading a message from Macrovia. "Proposal for exclusive partnership with Clearform LLC, Level 1 Security." Truthfully, after the call confirming I no longer had any legal obligations to Westbridge, I knew it wouldn't end with an apology. Because no one had apologized to me. They were simply trying to put out a fire after realizing they had thrown away the extinguisher. That call was only the warm-up. An hour later, Westbridge sent an official request to rehire me, not as an employee but as an external contractor, under any conditions I found acceptable. I responded with a price 4 times my old rate, 60% paid upfront, full technical ownership under Clearform LLC, and zero interference in execution. No one countered. At the same time, 2 more offers arrived, one from Anderton Data Group in Seattle and one from Volanix Ventures in Austin. Both had heard the story of Amanda through internal channels. Neither asked about the drama. They simply said, "We need someone who knows the system down to each wire. We need you." I felt lighter, but I didn't accept immediately. I still had one unfinished chapter. The press began to publish their versions. A long feature in the financial ledger titled "The Invisible Woman Who Held the Key to a $300 million Merger." They didn't name me. They used a metaphor, a tiny key holding back 2 massive machines. But inside the industry, everyone knew exactly who it was. Rumors spread. Anonymous messages arrived in my inbox. Some said simply, "Brilliant." Others were discreet invitations from companies preparing for IPOs. I didn't answer. Not because I felt superior, but because I was reorganizing everything, for the first time, with full authority. While Westbridge scrambled to clean the mess they created, I reopened the old architecture blueprints, this time not to patch the system, but to rebuild it for Macrovia under the highest, cleanest security standards, with no one authorized to sign off except me. I worked through the night, not because I had to, but because I wanted to build something no one would ever dare exploit again, a system no one could touch without understanding the value of the person who created it. When I sent the completed blueprint to Macrovia, their CEO responded with just one line. "Next time, they will remember who built the bridge." And I, the woman who had been fired without a second thought, dismissed as obsolete, erased with a dry HR email, was now the signature that the entire system could not function without. No revenge needed, no public spectacle. I was in the condition. After everything, I realized the strangest part wasn't that they needed me back, or that Macrovia was willing to bet on a name erased from a system with a single indifferent click. The strangest part was that I wasn't angry anymore. I once thought I would feel triumphant watching Westbridge spiral into chaos. I thought I would celebrate when Macrovia officially announced the collapse of the merger, a blow to the reputation of the people who dismissed me. But I didn't. I only felt calm, like standing on a mountain after a long climb and realizing the reason you are still standing isn't the peak, but the steps you chose along the way. I spent the next 2 weeks doing something I had never dared to do in 12 years of work: resting. No emails, no alarms, no meetings, no deadlines wrapped in, do this fast for the investors. Just me, my small house in Portland, sunlight spilling through the curtains, and a blank notebook where I began sketching the outline of a business model I had never allowed myself to imagine. Clearform LLC, the name I registered just to make my independent work legitimate, now had 3 official clients. One of them was a familiar and deeply ironic name, Westbridge. Yes, they came back. They had no other choice. The entire integration system I built was still under my control. They could hire a new team, but they had no keys, no foundational documentation, no originals. And me. I had everything. And more importantly, I had what they never gave me before: a choice. The new contract with Westbridge was a quiet reminder of how quickly power can shift. I was no longer a salaried employee. I was an external provider, a high-level service partner with full authority to execute my own method as long as the final result was delivered. Every time they sent an email asking for a change, I chose whether to respond. Every time they tried to schedule a sudden video meeting, I required 48 hours notice. Every adjustment, no matter how small, had a price. No more helping out. No more staying late to fix what someone else broke. I wasn't retaliating, I was setting boundaries. And the most surprising thing was that they accepted every one of them. No objections, no negotiations, because now they understood the true cost of stability. And I, the one they once called outdated or not fit for the new vision, was the only reason they hadn't sunk completely into the mess they created. But my biggest win wasn't Westbridge, it was Macrovia. Their CEO, Raymond Mitchell, whom I had never met in person, sent me a velvet box containing a handwritten letter and a fountain pen engraved with my name. Next time they will remember who built the bridge. A single sentence, simple and spare, but it was one of the few moments of recognition I had ever received in 12 years. I didn't need a plaque or a trophy. I needed clarity, and Macrovia gave me that. We signed a new contract not connected to Westbridge at all, a fully independent project on regional data link security. I was the lead consultant, paid by milestone, with full authority over methodology. For the first time in my career, I didn't need permission to do things right. I simply did them. In the last days of the month, after completing the system build for my third client, a young fintech startup in Denver, I opened my financial tracker and smiled quietly. In 5 months, Clearform's revenue had tripled my old Westbridge salary. I had no office, no permanent staff, no board, and no quarterly pressure. But I had something they lost long ago: flexibility paired with understanding. It is never the loudest person who holds the real weight. Sometimes it is the quiet woman in the corner, the one holding every thread together, who is the only one that cannot be replaced. I paused, standing by the window overlooking the backyard. The sunset stretched long over the warm wooden floor. The velvet box sat on the shelf beside the folder labeled Bridge Protocols, Final Version. Below it, the notebook I was still writing in. Not a list of revenge plans, not a collection of enemies, but a blueprint for building a security system for women in tech, where their voices aren't dismissed simply because they are not the type who charm a room of extroverts. I had seen too many brilliant women pushed aside, not because they lacked talent, but because they refused to make noise for attention. And I promised myself I would never let that cycle repeat. One day, I know the corporate world will go back to chasing people who promise more than they can deliver. They will call me legacy, outdated, and ready to be replaced. But I no longer need their approval, because I am not here to be accepted. I am here to build the bridge. And this time, I hold the key in my hand. No one can throw it away again. I am not here to be accepted. I am here to build the bridge. And this time, I hold the key in my hand. No one can throw it away again. Which moment in this story made you feel like you had lived it yourself? Whether it was being underestimated, pushed aside, or forgotten despite everything you carried, share it below. I read every single comment. Your words are more than reactions. They are proof that none of us go through this alone. And if you want to hear more stories about justice reclaimed quietly but deeply, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the next story might just be a piece of your own life. Thank you for listening until the very end.